Lesson 2. Implementation and Compliance. Learning Objectives. At the end of this lesson, you will be able to explain how the provision, reporting and management of climate finance is addressed in the agreement, explain how the agreement emphasizes the capacity building needs of developing country parties, explain the purpose of the enhanced transparency framework and the global stocktake, describe the mechanism to facilitate implementation of and promote compliance with the provisions of the Paris Agreement. Developed countries shall provide climate finance for developing countries. Is this true or false? That's right. The issue of differentiation in the finance context was a controversial topic in the negotiations. It was resolved by stating that developed countries shall provide climate finance for developing countries (Article 9.1), while other parties (developing countries) are encouraged to provide support voluntarily (Article 9.2). Developed countries should also take the lead in mobilizing climate finance from a wide variety of sources, instruments and channels, progressing beyond previous efforts (Article 9.3). Public or private finance. The idea that public funds, distinct from official development assistance, will be the main source of financing was dropped from the agreement during the final days of negotiation. Instead, Article 9.3 simply states the significant role of public funds. Let's drag the coins to the piggy bank to discover more. The idea that public funds, distinct from official development assistance, will be the main source of financing was dropped from the agreement during the final days of negotiation. Instead, Article 9.3 simply states the significant role of public funds. Unlike the Cancun agreements, which contained a collective public sector Fast Start finance target, the Paris Agreement has no reference to such a target. The adopting decision states that the existing collective mobilization goal $100 billion per annum by 2020, first announced at the 2009 Copenhagen COP, will continue until 2025. The CMA will set a new collective quantified goal with $100 billion as a floor prior to 2025 (subsection 53). Balance between mitigation and adaptation finance. The agreement includes the provision that financial resources should aim to achieve a balance between adaptation and mitigation, taking into account country-driven strategies, the priorities and needs of developing countries, in particular LDCs and SIDS (Article 9.4). This provision has featured in several climate instruments, including the 2009 Copenhagen Accord and in the 2010 Cancun agreements. Reporting finance. Developed countries have to biennially communicate indicative information below, but developing countries are encouraged to do so voluntarily. At COP22, a process will be launched to identify the biennial information about future financial support required from developed countries (subsection 55). Information about past support is to be submitted in accordance with the procedures for transparency of action, and support to be developed by the APA by CMA1 (subsection 56 and 91). SBSTA has also been requested to develop accounting modalities for support provided by developed countries (subsection 57). The global stocktake will consider information on climate finance efforts provided by developed countries and the agreement bodies (Article 9.6). Article 9.5. The provision of climate finance to developing countries, projected levels of public financial resources to be provided in the future to developing countries. And Article 9.7, support for developing countries mobilized through public interventions. Institutional arrangements. The UNFCCC's financial mechanism, including its operating entities, will serve as the financial mechanism of the agreement, Article 9.8. The adopting decision also states that the GCF, the Global Environment Facility, GEF, the Least Developed Countries Fund, and the Special Climate Change Fund will serve the agreement, subsection 58. In the adopting decision, the COP recommends that CMA provide guidance to the GEF and the GCF relating to the agreement for transmission by the COP. That is in subsection 61. Existing and future COP guidance on the operation of the financial mechanism will apply to the agreement as appropriate, with the necessary changes made, subsection 62. Let's look at the further information. CMA1 decided in Marrakesh that the Adaptation Fund should serve the agreement. CMA 1 to 3 will address the governance and institutional arrangements, safeguards, and operating modalities. According to the adopting decision, the Standing Committee on Finance will serve the CMA in the same way that it serves the COP, subsection 63. The institutions serving the agreement must aim to ensure efficient access to financial resources through simplified approval procedures and enhanced readiness support, in particular for LDCs and SIDs, Article 9.9. The adopting decision text also urges these institutions to enhance coordination and delivery of resources, subsection 64. Select the answers that reflect Article 10 of the Paris Agreement. The technology and financial mechanisms of the UNFCCC are required to support efforts to accelerate, encourage and enable innovation. The global stocktake will take into account support provided to developing countries for strengthening cooperative action on technology, development and transfer, of course. The agreement establishes a technology framework to provide guidance. Parties are not required to strengthen cooperative action on technology development and transfer. Article 10.2. Parties are required to strengthen cooperative action on technology development and transfer. Article 10.3 and Article 10.4. The agreement establishes a technology framework to provide overarching guidance to the work of the technology mechanism established under the UNFCCC, which will serve the agreement. Article 10.5. The technology and financial mechanisms of the UNFCCC, along with other actors or institutions, are required to support efforts to accelerate, encourage, and enable innovation for collaborative approaches to research and development and facilitating access to technology to developing country parties. Article 10.6. Support, including financial support, will also be provided to developing countries with a view to achieving a balance between support for mitigation and adaptation. The global stocktake will take information related to such support into account. Capacity building. The agreement emphasizes the capacity building needs of developing country parties, in particular those with the least capacity and those that are particularly vulnerable to the adverse effects of climate change, such as LDCs and SIDS. Article 11.1. Capacity building. All parties that enhance the capacity of developing country parties have to regularly communicate on capacity building actions or measures, while developing countries should regularly communicate progress made on implementing capacity building plans, policies, actions or measures, Article 11.4. COP22 adopted a decision on the initial institutional arrangements for capacity building, Article 11.5. It also underlines capacity to implement adaptation and mitigation actions, facilitate technology development, dissemination and deployment, access climate finance, educate, train, and raise public awareness, and enable transparent, timely, and accurate communication of information, Article 11.1. Subnational and local level capacity building is highlighted in the agreement, in addition to national level capacity building through an effective iterative process that is participatory, cross-cutting and gender responsive, Article 11.2. While all parties should cooperate to enhance the capacity of developing countries, developed countries should also enhance support for capacity building actions in developing countries, Article 11.3. Education, training and public awareness. This short article simply states that parties have to cooperate in taking measures as appropriate to enhance climate change education, training, public awareness, public participation, and public access to information, recognizing the importance of these steps with respect to enhancing actions under the agreement. And that is Article 12. According to Article 13, the agreement establishes what? Is it an enhanced, a formal, a stagnant, an informal transparency framework for action and support with built-in flexibility which takes into account parties' different capacities and builds upon collective experience. The agreement establishes an enhanced framework for action and support, Article 13, which will recognize the special circumstances of LDCs and SIDS and be implemented in a facilitative, non-intrusive, non-punitive manner, respectful of national sovereignty and avoid placing undue burden on parties. Article 13.2 and 13.3. It will build on the transparency arrangements under the UNFCCC, drawing on the expertise of national communications, biennial reports and biennial update reports, international assessment and review, and international consultation and analysis, Article 13.4. Transparency of action and support. Let's click on the tabs to learn more about purpose. The purpose of the framework for transparency of action is to provide a clear understanding of climate change action, including clarity and tracking of progress towards achieving the mitigation NDCs and adaptation actions to inform the global stocktake, Article 13.5. The purpose of the framework for transparency of support is to provide clarity on support provided and received by relevant individual parties for mitigation, adaptation, finance, technology development and transfer, and capacity building, and, to the extent possible, provide a full overview of aggregate financial support provided to inform the global stocktake. Article 13.6. Let's look at provision. Each party has to regularly provide a national greenhouse gas inventory prepared using methodologies approved by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, and agreed by the CMA, and information necessary to track progress made in implementing and achieving its mitigation NDC, Article 13.7. Information related to climate change impacts and adaptation as appropriate, Article 13.8. Information on support provided on finance, technology and capacity building, Article 13.9. Developing countries, meanwhile, should provide information on support needed and received, Article 13.10. Let's look at submission. All parties except LDCs and SIDS will have to submit the information set out in Articles 13.7 to 13.9 as appropriate, no less frequently than on a biennial basis. Subsection 90. LDCs and SIDs may submit this information at their discretion. Subsection 90. The adopting decision agrees to establish a capacity building initiative for transparency to build institutional and technical capacity and support developing country parties upon request in meeting enhanced transparency requirements. Subsection 84. Which articles deal with technical review, multilateral considerations and global stocktake? Is it Article 10 and 13, Article 14 and 15, Article 5 and 15, Article 13 and 14? Articles 13 and 14 deal with technical review, multilateral considerations and global stocktake. Technical review. The information provided under Articles 13.7 and 13.9 will undergo a technical expert review. Article 13.11. Developing countries that lack capacity will be provided assistance to identify capacity building needs. The review will consider any support provided by the party as relevant and the implementation and achievement of its NDC. Article 13.12. It will identify areas of improvement and include a review of the consistency of the information with the modalities, procedures and guidelines, and pay particular attention to respective national capabilities and circumstances of developing countries. Article 13.2. Multilateral consideration. Countries will also participate in a facilitative, multilateral consideration of progress with respect to efforts on finance and the implementation and achievement of their respective NDCs. Article 13.11. Support will be provided to developing countries for implementing their obligations related to transparency. Article 13.14, and also for the building of their transparency-related capacity on a continuous basis. Article 13.15. Global stocktake. The CMA will periodically take stock of the implementation of the Paris Agreement to assess collective progress towards achieving the purpose of the agreement and its long-term goals. A process called the global stocktake, also referred to in this course as the stocktake. The stocktake will be carried out in a comprehensive and facilitative manner, considering mitigation, adaptation, and the means of implementation and support, and in the light of equity and the best available science. Let's look at the additional information. The first stocktake will take place in 2023, and then every 5 years thereafter, unless otherwise decided by the CMA, Article 14.2. The adopting decision also decides to convene a facilitative dialogue among countries in 2018 to take stock of collective progress and inform the preparation of NDCs, subsection 20. Purpose of the global stocktake. The stocktake is meant to assess collective progress and not the activities of individual parties. However, the review of individual national implementation efforts should also inform the global stocktake. Articles 13.5 and 13.6. As a result, the precise scope of the stocktake, for instance, to what extent it focuses on the promised NDCs in different areas, or a subsequent assessment of their actual achievements, will have to be further defined by the CMA. Let's look at the additional information. The outcome of the stocktake will inform parties in updating and enhancing, in a nationally determined manner, their actions and support in accordance with the relevant provisions of the agreement, as well as in enhancing international cooperation for climate action. What is the difference between the Kyoto Protocol and the Paris Agreement in regards to compliance? Is it? Compliance under the Paris Agreement is punitive and does not focus solely on facilitating implementation and promoting compliance through a facilitative committee. Or, compliance under the Kyoto Protocol is non-punitive and focuses solely on facilitating implementation and promoting compliance through a facilitative committee. Or, compliance under the Paris Agreement is non-punitive and focuses solely on facilitating implementation and promoting compliance through a facilitative committee. The Kyoto Protocol required parties to address cases of non-compliance, Article 18 of the Protocol. As a result, parties subsequently established a compliance mechanism with a facilitative and an enforcement branch to facilitate, promote, and enforce compliance. In comparison, compliance under the Paris Agreement is non-punitive and focuses solely on facilitating implementation and promoting compliance through a facilitative committee. The facilitative committee will report annually to the CMA, and the modalities and procedures for the functioning of this committee will be adopted by CMA1, Article 15.3. Facilitating implementation and compliance. Article 15.1 establishes a mechanism to facilitate implementation of and promote compliance with the provisions of the Paris Agreement. Composition of the committee. The adopting decision further states that the committee will consist of 12 members with recognized competence in relevant scientific, technical, socio-economic or legal fields, and will be elected by the CMA on the basis of equitable geographical representation. Let's look at the additional information. The mechanism will consist of an expert-based facilitative committee that will function in a transparent, non-adversarial and non-punitive manner, and will pay particular attention to the respective national capabilities and circumstances of parties. Article 15.2. 2 members will be chosen from each of the 5 regional groups of the United Nations, and 1 member each will be chosen from the LDCs and SIDS, while taking gender balance into account. Subsection 102. The APA has been requested to develop modalities and procedures for the effective operation of the Committee for consideration and adoption by CMA1, subsection 103. Choose all the correct answers under the Paris Agreement. The CMA is requested to develop modalities and procedures for the effective operation of the Committee for consideration and adoption, to take the decisions necessary to promote its effective implementation, mandated to keep the effective implementation of the government under review, the governing body of the agreement, the Conference of the Parties serving as the meeting of the parties to the Paris Agreement, CMA, will be the governing body of the agreement, Article 16.1. The CMA is mandated to keep the effective implementation of the agreement under review and take the decisions necessary to promote its effective implementation. For that purpose, it can establish subsidiary bodies and exercise other functions deemed necessary for the implementation of the agreement, Article 16.4. Click on the articles to learn more. The rules of procedure of the COP and the financial procedures applied under the UNFCCC will apply to the agreement with necessary changes, unless the CMA decides otherwise, Article 16.5. Thus, the draft rules of procedure of the COP and its subsidiary bodies, which have never been adopted but are applied, with the exception of Rule 42 on voting, will govern the proceedings of the CMA, except as may be decided by the CMA. Let's look at the additional information first. While COP decisions can have a normative character for institutions and bodies of the UNFCCC process, for instance, the Secretariat or mechanisms under its guidance such as the GCF, It is generally recognized that they are not binding on the parties in the absence of an express mandate (brackets) to take legally binding decisions. This also applies to the powers of the manner as the CMP and meetings will be convened in conjunction with the COP (brackets, Article 16.6). An extraordinary session of the CMA requires the support of at least 1/3 of the parties (brackets, Article 16.7). Secretariat. The UNFCCC Secretariat will serve as the Secretariat of the Agreement (brackets, Article 17.1). The Secretariat's functions and the arrangements made for its functioning shall be those assigned to it under Article 8 of the UNFCCC, under the Paris Agreement, and by CMA (brackets, Article 17.2). Other subsidiary bodies and institutional arrangements. Other subsidiary bodies or institutional arrangements of the UNFCCC will also serve the agreement, should the CMA so decide. The agreement specifically identifies institutional arrangements under the UNFCCC, for example, the WIM, the financial mechanism, and the technology mechanism, that will in future operate under the new agreement. However, the operation of subsidiary bodies and other institutional arrangements established by or under the Convention, other than those referred to in the agreement, have not been as explicitly defined. Should the CMA decide to bring other bodies and institutions into the fold of the agreement, it can, within the general scope of the agreement, specify their functions and guide their activities. (Brackets Article 19.1 and 19.2).